Wiki jana tumesema majimbo letu makubwa, counties, government ipatiwe pesa bilioni 415 ndio ukatusi ule ulifanya kupandilishwe mambo ya majimbo ndio watu wafanyiwe kazi ya kutosha. Kwa sababu kule vijijini magavana wako na kazi nyingi na ndio tunawatetea waongezewe pesa, wako na kazi ya kilimo, mambo ya hospitali, mambo mingi inatakikana kule, hata maji ya kulima na mambo ile ingine. Ndio mfanyikazi na ule mtu mwingine ako vijijini aweze kunisaidia kwa sababu ndio analipa ile usuru. Kwa hivyo ni kitu kubwa sana ya aibu ya MP kuwa wanaingilia sisi na hatuna haja na pesa zao na tuwaingilie. Na wale watu walitengeneza katiba ya kusema maseneta wawe ni nyumba ya juu. Walikuwa na akili ya kutosha kwa sababu Bwana Spika ndio kwa sababu alikuwa anaangalia mwananchi amenyenyeshwa namna gani. Kwa hivyo ndio ukatusi ukakuja na ndio tunaona sisi tunafanya kazi ile nafaa. Na pia ule mwenye alitengeneza katiba ndio uliona alitunyima pesa hata ya project yoyote ndio tuweze kuangalia kazi kule vijijini. Bwana Spika, hao wajumbe wamesoea vibaya sana. Kwa sababu ukienda kaunti zingine unakuta hata wakati kuko na umati, either ni wa president ama ni wa governor ama ni umati wa aina gani, unakuta wale waheshimiwa wakipatiwa masaa ya kuongea wanaongea masaa yote. Alafu ikifika wakati wa senator kuongea unakuta hata deputy wa governor unakuta hata akupatie heshima. Na ingeomba Kenya mzima kule tuweze kuona vile tutavusiriwe mambo ambaye vile senator anafaa awe ako kiwango gani. Kwa kulingana katiba kutoka kwa MP tunaenda kwa women rep na tunaenda kwa governor, alafu na governor mwenyewe aweze kuita deputy wake. Kwa hivyo maseneta wanadharuriwa, lakini wanatudharau, lakini kazi tumefanya ya kutosha ya kuangalia governor anafanya kazi gani. Kwa hivyo ningeomba pia wakituingilia hivyo, ningeomba wakati mwingine si tupitishe sheria kama tunafanya tunaangalia pesa ya county inafanya kazi na namna gani, hata sisi tutatengeneza katiba ile pesa ya CDF tuwe tukiangalia, kwa sababu anajipiga kivua kwa sababu hakuna mtu ako na uwezo wa kuangalia pesa ya CDF inafanya kazi na namna gani. Kwa hivyo Bwana Spika, nasema ni aibu kubwa sana ya our MPs wanatudharau, lakini wanataka wajue sisi ni nyumba ya juu na sisi ni nyumba ya juu na our MPs ni nyumba ya chini. Kwa hivyo Bwana Spika, ningeomba turudi kwa constitution tena ndio tujue vile iko kutoka kwa MP kwenda kwa women rep na kwenda kwa senator alafu kwenda kwa governor. Kwa hivyo Bwana Spika, nataka nikuambie hata kuna watu waesi kuongea kwa hii Senate vile tumenyanyaswa na wa MPs na pia na deputy. Na ndio unaona hata tumepitisha vile tutakuwa tunafanya, kwa sababu upande wa governor, upande wa senator na upande wa MP ni kama shule ya msingi na shule ya sekondari. Sijaona mtu ametoka shule ya msingi akienda ya sekondari tusikie huyo mtoto ametoka shule ya sekondari arudi shule ya chini. Kwa hivyo nataka kuambia MPs wale wako na chuki na wale wako na kiburi, sio sisi tuambia waende kiti ya MP, wakitaka kiti wangoje miaka 5 ikuje ndio waweze kusimama kiti ya senator. Kwa hivyo nataka kusema kutoka siku ya leo katika Kenya mzima MP wote 349 wanjue senator tuko senator 66 na county 47 na tuko na uwezo wa kuangalia pesa ya county government vile governors wanafanya kazi. Kwa hivyo nataka niambie MP, singeona ni vizuri ati unasema pesa ya governor inakuliwa, kwani wewe ni senator. Kwa hivyo Bwana Speaker, mimi naunga mkono, mimi napinga mara 100 mara 200 kwa hii kikaratasi, kwa hii mjadala, kwa sababu ni kitu iko na aibu katika Kenya yetu. Na ninataka kusema hakuna mtu mkubwa kama senator, ni senator mkubwa kuliko MP. Alafu kutoka kwa senator ni kuwa kwa governor. Asante Bwana Speaker, napinga mara 100. Ni mimi senator wa Embu County, daktari ambaye ni deputy party leader in Kenya Kwanza. Asante Bwana Speaker.
Order, honorable members. Order, honorable members. Senator Osotsi Godfrey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, I am even surprised why we are debating this bill, because this bill is a bill that is unconstitutional in almost every clause that I've gone through, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, secondly, in the tradition of bicameral parliament, bicameralism is managed through non-legislative. It's managed outside the law. Without specific legislation. It is the norms, it is the tradition, and is a standing order. So for one to decide to come up with a piece of legislation to manage the relationship between the two houses, I think in itself, it is a new standard that the owner of this bill is trying to come up with. Mr. Speaker, I know probably one of the reasons why the owner of this bill is trying to come up with this bill is because of the power struggles that the two houses have had in the past. Mr. Speaker, you remember the petition number 284 of 2019, which led to the High Court nullifying a record 23 pieces of legislation, including the Tax Laws Amendments Act, which the court declared them a nullity. And I think when you read through this bill, you see an attempt to try and patch up things so that we do not have an opportunity of going to court when we feel that there has been some form of discrimination or unfairness on the part of Senate. So this bill, basically, I look at it from that prism, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are in bicameral parliament. But maybe we need to reflect as a house whether truly we are in a bicameral parliament or we are just something in between there. Because bicameralism has to have an upper house. If you look at other jurisdictions, UK, US, France, even here in Africa, a country like Nigeria in West Africa, bicameralism must have a house that is reasonable, a house that is small, a house that looks at issues with expert scrutiny, a house that provides further democratic check on the lower house. That is bicameralism. But now, in this country, we basically have two houses. One house that pretends to be an upper house, which is supposed to be a lower house. I think we must have a relook at the way bicameralism is structured in this country. Mr. Speaker, I had an opportunity last year to visit the Federal Republic of Nigeria, where I visited the House of Representatives and I also visited the Senate. And when you visit the two houses in that country, even before someone tells you that this is a lower house and this is an upper house, you see for yourself. You see for yourself how the Senate of the Federal Republic of Nigeria is strong and effective. And you remember that is the house recently they rejected the presidential request to send the military to Niger and other countries which had problems. The House acts with some firmness. The House cannot be intimidated. I think the same should happen in Kenya. And I want to thank Senate. We have really tried. In the eyes of the public, we have come out as a more reasonable house, a house that stands with the people, a house that is effective. Unlike our colleagues on the other house, where I served for 5 years, which have become a disgrace to this society. Mr. Speaker, it was a shame the way the National Assembly managed the impeachment motion against Cabinet Secretary Linturi. And I think that should be a wake-up call to Kenyans, that we really need Senate to veto the decisions of National Assembly. Because at this rate, we are not going to have a parliament in this country. I was so disappointed, Mr. Speaker, that when the finance bill 2023 was passed by that house, the members of parliament, National Assembly were cheering like school children to pass a bill that was going to punish the people of Kenya. And then a few months later, an MP stands somewhere and says, we passed that bill without reading. That is a reason enough for that house to be vetted, to be vetoed by this Senate. And I think someone here, I think is Senator Sifuna, suggested that why can't the Senate also initiate bills to try and correct these wrongs in our parliamentary system, so that we get things to be done in the right manner. Mr. Speaker, in bicameralism, if you look at the history of bicameralism, the Senate, in our case, is a house of calm, is a house that has experts, is a house that takes time to scrutinize matters before they pass. And I think that if this person who came up with this bill really meant well for this country, he should have looked at other jurisdictions where we have bicameralism and understand that our problem is not how we relate with the National Assembly. Our problem is that lack of clarity as to which house is higher than the other. We say we are at the higher house because that is a global best practice. But legally, Mr. Speaker, I think we need to put it in our laws so that it's very clear that which house is bigger than the other. Mr. Speaker, if you read through this bill, you notice that the intention is basically to cripple the Senate and make Senate weak and weak and weak. I have gone through the provisions of this bill, Mr. Speaker, and if you look at clause 7, it is listing a number of laws and basically trying to say that this particular bill should be the powers of the other house. For example, Mr. Speaker, when under C, they say the annual county allocation of revenue bill, that it will be considered by both houses. But they go ahead and deny us the powers to participate in appropriations bill. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution is very clear that the houses of parliament should be involved in budget-making process. Why should we be denied an opportunity to participate in appropriations bill, a finance bill, because after all, Mr. Speaker, we passed two major instruments in the financial process. The budget policy statement, which this House passes, the medium-term debt management strategy. Why are we involved in passing these two important financial instruments when we cannot be involved in participating in appropriations bill, in finance bill, or any other bill that is a money bill? Mr. Speaker, this is a bigger question that we want answered. Mr. Speaker, this bill also tries to, under clause number 14, where it says, if one house passes an ordinary bill concerning county government and the second house rejects the bill, it shall be referred for mediation committee. Mr. Speaker, on one hand, they want to make sure that Senate does not handle some bills. On the other hand, they want to curtail the Senate so that if Senate passes any bill that concerns counties, then they can veto it and take it to the mediation committee. That is mischief, Mr. Speaker, which I have noted there. Mr. Speaker, also, when you say that this bill affects counties and the other bill does not affect counties, it doesn't make sense at all. Because we are in the same country, and there is no bill that you can say this bill does not affect counties, or this bill affects counties. All bills are the same. They affect counties in one way or another, because we are in the same country, Mr. Speaker. So one wanting to legislate, to make a decision as to which bill affects counties and which bill does not affect counties should not apply here, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also find section 17 of this bill very, very unconstitutional, because section 17(2) says that at any joint sitting of the House, the standing orders of the National Assembly shall apply. So what do we do with our standing orders in the Senate? They are basically invalidating the standing orders of the Senate, that the standing orders of Senate are inferior to the standing orders of the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, it goes further to say that the speakers of the House of Parliament shall enforce any directions given during a joint sitting in relation to the conduct of a member of Parliament in accordance with the applicable provisions of the National Assembly standing orders. Mr. Speaker, what this implies is that it elevates the Speaker of the National Assembly to someone even above our own Speaker, that this Speaker of the National Assembly will have the powers to punish a member of the Senate on a matter that has come out before the joint committee. So this is unconstitutional, and Mr. Speaker, this should not see the light of the day. Mr. Speaker, public participation. In fact, now, this bill now goes beyond the main objective, which is managing bicameralism. It goes beyond that to introduce public participation, trying to put roadblocks on the public participation. Mr. Speaker, if you read section 19, section 19(3), where it says, a committee of a House of Parliament shall have broad measure of discretion in conducting public participation. What is that, Mr. Speaker? The courts have already ruled on this matter, Mr. Speaker, that public participation should not be cosmetic. Public participation should be done adequately. But this particular section is introducing this clause so that they can, those who like rushing bills through can be able to rush through bills without adequate public participation. And then it goes ahead and talks about hides behind duplication to deny the second house an opportunity to conduct adequate participation on a bill. Mr. Speaker, on the clause 19, 7 and 8, on the validity of the bills which are processed by these houses. Again, this section is unconstitutional. Mr. Speaker, it says, a committee of parliament shall consider the views received from public participation broadly, meaning that the specific views received from the public will not be given adequate attention. And this law will facilitate that, Mr. Speaker. And 8 says, an act of parliament is not invalid on account of failure to incorporate any views submitted during public participation. You have seen, Mr. Speaker, the National Assembly. They go to the public. 90% of the views that are given by the public, they are never implemented in the final bill that is passed. One case is the finance bill, Mr. Speaker. Housing bill. All the things that the public said, they were never factored in the final bill that was passed by those houses. So basically, what this is trying to do, Mr. Speaker, is now introducing other provisions using bicameralism to make it easy for the other house to be passing bills without being questioned in court of law as to the adequacy of those bills in terms of public participation. Mr. Speaker, if you look at section 20 of the bill that says, before formally declaring the existence of a dispute between the houses of parliament, the House of Parliament shall in good faith make every reasonable effort and take all the necessary steps to amicably resolve the matter by initiating direct negotiations with or through an intermediary. Mr. Speaker, this is basically stopping either house from taking any other measures like going to court on a matter so that we are not able to take our disputes to court when we are required to go to court, as it has been done in the past. So, Mr. Speaker, generally, bill is unconstitutional. This bill goes against the tenets of bicameralism that is not known globally, and this bill should not even be passed by this House at this stage, the second reading. This bill should be rejected in totality, and this bill is another attempt at killing devolution in this country. And we know that the House that has been persistently been used to kill devolution is the National Assembly. Everything they do, even the way they behave on the ground, Mr. Speaker, management of roads, rural roads in our counties, the National Assembly is an existential threat to devolution in this country. And we thought that now that we have a speaker who has been a senator, things will be different. Mr. Speaker, I am concerned that, in fact, under Speaker Wetangula, the National Assembly has become a very serious threat to devolution. I served in the National Assembly under the current Attorney General, who was against devolution, but not to the extent of the current Speaker. he has basically demonstrated that he cannot.
Senator Osotsi, your time is up. Thank you, Senator Osotsi. Senator Oroba Gloria.
Thank you, Speaker, for this opportunity to stand and weigh in on this bill. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this time also to maybe inform the public of what it takes to even have a bill get to first reading, Mr. Speaker. Because sometimes as legislators, when we are out there advocating and trying to sensitize the public on the work that we do here, Mr. Speaker, the public sometimes thinks that you're lying when you say that getting a bill to first reading literally can cost you an arm and a leg. Mr. Speaker, this bill, even as we discuss it, is a further hindrance or highlights the hindrances that we deal with to even legislate small amendments, one-line amendments, which can impact the public in terms of changing their lives, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I pride myself in being an amateur politician, Mr. Speaker, because in that sense, I get to learn a lot of things, Mr. Speaker. I get to learn from those who carry themselves as veteran politicians. I get to learn from the electorate. I get to learn from the staff who are here. So I'm proud to say that actually I don't know much about standing orders. I don't know much about, I learn. Every day for me is a learning lesson, Mr. Speaker. And I can tell you, with the 6 bills that I have tabled in the 21 or so months that we have been here, Mr. Speaker, I've learned a lot. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I've learned that in the Senate, you can have a bill that is clearly touching on devolution, that you are passionate about, you draft it, you work with the legal clerks here, they help you on all those things. You get to a place where you have a first draft, you go through the committee stage, you go through publishing, public participation, first reading, second reading. You even get to a point where your fellow senators might want to punish you because they don't like you, so they want to drop your bill. You get past that, Mr. Speaker, only to find out that even after all of that, even if that bill passes here, the National Assembly will squash it, Mr. Speaker. Just to give you statistics of how it looks like right now, Mr. Speaker, because sometimes when we speak, I like to use data. In this 13th Parliament, the Senate has had 94 bills that have been published. Out of those 94 bills that have been published, Mr. Speaker, you will find that those that actually went through concurrence are 22. The Senate bills that are undergoing concurrence right now are 22. And from those 22, you'll find that the Senate bills passed and referred to the National Assembly, but have not been concluded at just 18. So if you go through the statistics here, and you compare the bills that the Senate is passing, and the bills that the National Assembly is passing and bringing to our House for concurrence, Mr. Speaker, you will see that as a House, we are actually very friendly towards the National Assembly, just from the data that has been put out in terms of the number of bills that the Senate has concurred with the National Assembly and has gone ahead to pass, Mr. Speaker. But one of the things that we don't highlight enough, Mr. Speaker, is that there are bills that originate from the National Assembly that come to the Senate, and the Senate actually does not give concurrence because certain issues need to be discussed, they touch on devolution, and certain things have to be dealt with at the Senate. Mr. Speaker, but nevertheless, those bills are still passed in the National Assembly, concluded, and to anyone's shock out there, even without the Senate concurring and agreeing to those bills are passed, and the National Assembly quickly takes those bills to the President to assent into law, Mr. Speaker. An example of that is the Land Laws Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 65 of 2023 of the Majority Leader. That bill, Mr. Speaker, actually did not get concurrence from the Senate. The Senate wanted to participate in certain issues, but Mr. Speaker, without our participation, without the upper house actually engaging in that bill was signed into law. Mr. Speaker, another example is that Statute Law Miscellaneous Amendment number 2, National Assembly Bill number 68, 2023, again by the Majority Leader, Mr. Speaker. That bill was assented into law without the participation and concurrence of the Senate, Mr. Speaker, the Senate being the upper house. Mr. Speaker, I find it very difficult to understand how then a proposed bill from the National Assembly by a National Assembly legislator can even be brought to this house to try and correct the wrongdoings that actually the National Assembly is participating in, Mr. Speaker. Because in this same data, there are no bills that have come from the Senate that have not sought concurrence in the National Assembly that have been assented to law, Mr. Speaker. The bad behavior is coming from the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, in the last parliament, 73 acts which had already been signed into law by the president were repealed, Mr. Speaker, because someone went to court and literally took the court through the process of a bill passing into law. And it meant that there should be concurrence from the upper house, from the Senate. 73 acts were repealed by the courts because they did not go through that procedure. They did not come to Senate, Mr. Speaker. The National Assembly was then asked to go and sit down with the Senate and regularize those 73 acts. Mr. Speaker, in their usual manner, the National Assembly, they did not want to come and sit with the upper house to regularize and follow the procedure to have those acts actually properly passed into law. Instead, they went back to court. They went to the Supreme Court, Mr. Speaker. When they went to the Supreme Court, they went to basically appeal and argue that these 73 acts should remain as law, Mr. Speaker, because they simply did not want to sit with the upper house. At that point, Mr. Speaker, because the president had already signed those 73 acts into law, it was an embarrassment to even the Republic of Kenya, showing how disorganized we are as a parliament. So, in an aim to actually save face, the Supreme Court again gave a timeline and said that the upper house and the lower house, the National Assembly, should sit down and fix what needs to be fixed. Mr. Speaker, to date, nothing has happened. So that should tell you, first of all, Mr. Speaker, that Senate, we are not the aggressors. We are not the people who are going out of our way to do the wrong things, Mr. Speaker. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, as I stand today, I will give you an example of what happens, and I'm glad that I get this opportunity. Of my 6 bills, one of the bills that I have is the Whistleblower Protection Bill, Mr. Speaker, which I inherited from a previous senator who had been pushing this Whistleblower Protection Bill through the Jailer Committee. So the bill had been drafted, we fine-tuned it into what is currently happening in the country. Mr. Speaker, I proposed it. I went through a caucus as well that I sit in, the APNAC caucus, Mr. Speaker. I brought it here. The JLAC committee passed it and said, you know, this bill is proper. It should now go ahead into the procedure, Mr. Speaker. If you look at the summary of the bills that are apparently undergoing concurrence from the Senate to the National Assembly, that my bill, the Whistleblower Protection Bill, is apparently one of the bills that is awaiting for National Assembly to say, okay, this bill is proper, it's not a money bill, it is drafted in a way that is constitutional, so go ahead and move forward, Mr. Speaker. As I wait, if you look at this summary that I have, and this is a public document of all the legislative agenda from both houses, as I wait for my bill on the whistleblower protection to be approved on the concurrence from the National Assembly so that we can continue with it here, Mr. Speaker, I will draw your attention to a bill by Honorable Irene Kasalu, a member of parliament from the National Assembly. She has a bill called the Whistleblower Protection Bill, National Assembly Bill number 56 of 2023, a copy-paste of my bill, Mr. Speaker. So, as I am waiting for the National Assembly to tell me that the bill that I inherited, which has in fact originated from the Senate, because I did not inherit it from the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker. I inherited it from a former senator who had been working on it in the Senate where it originated from. Mr. Speaker, I tabled it, JLAC approved it because they were familiar with it. And Mr. Speaker, as I am waiting, Honorable Kasilu has already inherited the bill. And I can promise you, Mr. Speaker, because I know, and now, as much as I keep saying I'm an amateur, and I know other senators, pride themselves, they know the standing, they know everything. Me, I don't know much, but I know this much. My bill will not get concurrence from National Assembly. But Irene Kasalu will be allowed to proceed with the same bill, Mr. Speaker. You know, as much as we don't like shouting about the mess that we have internally, either within Senate or within National Assembly, you know, you get to a point, Mr. Speaker, the frustration of what you're dealing with. First of all, the basic logistics of running your business in Parliament, the new changes with the Bunge Towers, the fights become so many that by the time you are now actually fighting for a legislative agenda, Mr. Speaker, and you ask yourself, is it really worth it? Mr. Speaker, my sanitary towels bill that I tabled and even officially launched on International Menstrual Hygiene Day last year, May 27th, last year. I even launched it. The Cabinet Secretary and the PS for the legislative agenda acknowledged it. It was a public document that I launched that I've been waiting for it to be processed internally, Mr. Speaker. If you go through where that bill is, again, in the number of bills that are waiting to be approved, so to speak, seeking concurrence from the National Assembly, you will see that my bill of the free sanitary towels is one of them there. Since May last year, Mr. Speaker, I'm still waiting to be told that this bill is in fact a bill that affects counties, Mr. Speaker. That this bill is in fact a bill that is not just centralized as a money bill. I'm waiting for National Assembly, the same county women representatives who are crying and screaming and saying that they are not receiving sanitary towels, Mr. Speaker. Their house, the National Assembly, is the one that is actually slowing down a legislative proposal that is supposed to permanently cure period poverty. That is the irony of the things that we do here in Parliament, Mr. Speaker. I can go on and on about examples that are personal to me in terms of my bills. The Konza Technopolis bill, in terms of data protection bill, all my bills. In fact, at this point, I feel, if not for anything, I can come back here as a consultant on the legislative agenda, because there is no office that I don't know in terms of pushing your agenda and pushing your legislative agenda, Mr. Speaker. I have knocked on doors, I have camped in corridors waiting for whoever I need to wait for to ensure that a draft is moved from one point to another. But it doesn't matter, because even if I do all of that within the Senate, once we are done at the Senate, Mr. Speaker, a National Assembly committee will sit and say, this bill does not affect counties, Mr. Speaker. Then my question comes, when a Senate bill is taken to the National Assembly and they thoroughly go through it with whichever internal processes they have, and they come back and tell you, we are rejecting, we're not going to give you concurrence because this bill does not affect counties. The fundamental question then is, if that bill does not affect counties, when it is passed to law, should counties actually, take up the law? Because if from the legislative agenda they are saying, this bill does not affect counties, fine, then pass it. But then also don't expect that counties should be able to, take the law as any other law. So the issue of the bill does not affect counties, to me, is neither here nor there, Mr. Speaker. The issue of, is it a money bill or not a money bill, Mr. Speaker? Every single bill that originates from this House will touch on resources one way or another. There's no bill that you will come here to the Senate to amend that does not touch one way or another on money. So it's like a lazy kind of thinking where someone just wants to make sure they shoot down your bill and say, oh, that's a money bill, Mr. Speaker. All bills touch on resources. All resources are tied to money. So maybe what we need to even first of all talk about before we even discuss a bill originating from the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker, and just excuse me for saying this, the fact that we have even prioritized the debate on this bill before my free sanitary towels bill, Mr. Speaker, as much as I'm calling out people in the National Assembly, can I also just call out our Senate Business Committee? We are prioritizing bills originating from the National Assembly, and our in-house bills in the Senate are sitting, Mr. Speaker. At the end of the day, we are losing. We are losing the war. You could be winning this small battle, but we are losing the war. Can we even from, as a perspective of the Senate, can we first understand that if National Assembly is waking up day and night to kill devolution and fight the upper house, why are we even prioritizing debating what honestly is an unconstitutional amendment or proposal of a legislative agenda, Mr. Speaker? I have to say that we have allowed, and when I say we, the veteran politicians have allowed for a long time for many things to go wrong. And we've been sitting on the sideline because I just came here 20 months ago, Mr. Speaker. The issues we are having, the logistical issues we are even having with our own offices, it is because we have allowed it. We are members, we are senators, but we are being steered and we are being, we are being governed by people who, first of all, are not elected in any way, whether specially elected or through the ballot. Those are the people who are running the businesses of this house. And I don't know how better way to say it, but I'll say, Mr. Speaker, before we start pointing fingers, let us clean up our own house, starting with whether we really need the joint services or whether we are, governed by our own commissioners. We have a lot of in-house problems that we need to deal with before we start debating a bill that has originated from National Assembly. In itself, it is a paradox. I want to oppose this bill, and I want to strongly suggest to the Senate Business Committee, you continue to insult us by prioritizing the bills from National Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Mwenye Haji Mohamed Faki.
Asante Bwana Spika kwa kunipa fursa hii kuchangia mswada wa sheria ya nyumba za bunge. Mheshimiwa Spika, naona kiongozi wangu naibu wa kiongozi wangu ana ghadhabu kidogo, nataka nichukue dakika chache. Lakini Mheshimiwa Spika, kwanza kabisa ningependa kuipongeza kamati yako ya sheria na haki kwa mapendekezo yake kwamba bunge la Senate likatae mswada huu. Mheshimiwa Spika, najua kwamba katika kamati yako kuna maseneta wenye tajiriba kubwa, mawakili ambao wameweza kusoma na kushauri bunge hili kwamba mswada huu hauna wema kwa bunge la Senate. Mheshimiwa Spika, ningependa kuchangia mambo matatu ili nimpe nafasi Seneta Wambua kabla ya bunge kusimama aweze kuchangia mswada huu. Kwanza kabisa Mheshimiwa Spika, mswada huu ulichapishwa kinyume na kifungu cha 113 cha katiba yetu, kwamba haukupelekwa mswada huu kabla ya kuchapishwa, haukupelekwa kwa Speaker wa Senate ili kuidhinisha kama anakubali kuwa mswada hauathiri county. Mheshimiwa Spika, hii ni moja ya zile taratibu ambazo zinazingatiwa na katiba kuhusiana na miswada ambayo inapelekwa katika bunge zote. Mheshimiwa Spika, itakumbuka kwamba mwaka 2019 bunge hili la Senate lilikwenda mahakamani na mahakama ikabatilisha sheria karibu 25 ambazo zilikuwa zimepelekwa bunge la kitaifa na kupitishwa bila kuletwa katika bunge la Senate. Kwa Mheshimiwa Spika, mswada huu kwa vile unaathiri bunge la Senate na umejadiliwa, ulichapishwa, ukajadiliwa na kupitishwa katika bunge la kitaifa bila ya Speaker wa Senate kuudhinisha, Mheshimiwa Spika, hiyo ni kinyume na katiba. Kwa hivyo hilo kwanza ni jambo la kwanza ambalo lazima tukatae mswada huu. Mheshimiwa Spika, jambo la pili ni kuwa mswada huu unakiuka katiba. Na Mheshimiwa Spika, ziko hukumu za mahakama nyingi ambazo zinasema kwamba sheria ambayo itapitishwa na bunge bila ya kupelekwa ama bila ya kupitishwa kwa Speaker wa Senate, sheria hiyo imekuwa ni kinyume na sheria, kwa hivyo ni batili. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, hukumu zote hizo zinazingatia kwamba lazima ushauri upatikane kutoka kwa bunge la Senate kama mswada unaathiri county au la. Mheshimiwa Spika, jambo la tatu ni kwamba kuhusiana na swala la uhusishaji umma, yani public participation kwa Kiingereza. Mheshimiwa Spika, bunge la Senate wakati linaangalia miswada ambayo itakuwa imeletwa katika bunge hili kutoka kwa bunge la kitaifa, pendekezo katika sheria hii ni kwamba haifai kurejelea masuala ya uhusishaji umma. Mheshimiwa Spika, uhusishaji umma katika Senate unaangalia zaidi masuala ya ugatuzi. Tumeona kwamba kuna mambo mengi ambayo bunge la kitaifa huyaangalia, lakini sio masuala ambayo yanahusiana na ugatuzi. Mheshimiwa Spika, majuzi tuliangalia katika kamati ya delegated legislation, tuliangalia masuala ya kanuni za uhamiaji, yani refugee regulations. Mheshimiwa Spika, japokuwa sheria ile ilikuwa kanuni zile zimepitishwa na bunge la kitaifa na wakasema kwamba walikuwa wamefanya uhusishaji umma kwa upana, lakini walikuwa hawakuhusisha umma kwa masala ya kwamba zile gatuzi ambazo zimekuwa zikipokea wakimbizi, kwa mfano gatuzi ya Garissa, gatuzi la Turkana, gatuzi la Mombasa na Busia na kwingineko, hazikuhusishwa katika kuangalia mswada huu. Kwa hivyo Mheshimiwa Spika, ikawa mawazo yaliyotoka pale yalikuwa ni kinyume na yale ambayo alikuwa ameyapata katika bunge la kitaifa. Mheshimiwa Spika, swala hilo pia la uhusishaji umma tulilijadili juzi pia katika kamati hiyo wakati tulipokuwa tunaangalia kanuni mpya za affordable housing. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, swala la uhusishaji umma ni swala la kikatiba, kwa hivyo haliwezi kuondolewa na sheria kama hii ambayo tunaizungumzia. Mheshimiwa Spika, mwisho ni kwamba mahakama ilisema kuwa sheria lazima iletwe au mswada wa sheria lazima upelekwe katika bunge la kitaifa, bunge la Senate kwa uamuzi wa Spika kama sheria hiyo inaathiri county au la. Mheshimiwa Spika, iwapo sheria hii itapita, swala hili ambalo ni swala la kikatiba, Mheshimiwa Spika, litakuwa limeondolewa kwa mlango wa nyuma, kwa sababu sheria zote zile ambazo wangetaka kupitisha ambazo wameziorodhesha hapa katika kifungu cha kifungu cha 12 cha sheria hii, Mheshimiwa Spika, ina maana zote hizi zitakuwa hazina faida yoyote kwa Seneti. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, tunapinga sheria hii, na kwamba sheria hii Mheshimiwa Spika ilikuwa lazima kwanza mabunge yote mawili yatoe wawakilishi wakakae chini waangalie ni mambo gani ambayo wataweza kuyaweka kwa mswada huu ili mswada uwe unaweza kukubalika katika bunge zote mbili. Mheshimiwa Spika, hatuwezi kutunga sheria ya kusimamia bunge la Senate wakati maseneta hawajahusishwa na utungaji wa sheria ile. Mheshimiwa Spika, kuja hapa kujadili sheria hii wakati hatukuhusishwa, Mheshimiwa Spika, ni kinyume na maadili ambayo yanafaa kutumika wakati tunaangalia sheria kama hii. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, tunapinga mswada huu na kwamba ni lazima tukatae kama Senate, kwa sababu tukiupitisha itakuwa ni kujitia kitanzi wenyewe sisi kama maseneta. Asante Mheshimiwa Spika.
Asante sana Senator Faki. Senator Karen Nyamu.
Mr. Speaker, this bill is a blatant display of audacity by the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker. And as the bill reads, it seeks to restrict our representative and our legislative mandate as a Senate by going against provisions of Article 94, Article 96, Article 109, Article 111, Article 112 and 114 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. And this amounts to killing devolution. The proposal that one committee of one house electing not to conduct public participation on account of public participation conducted by another house, Mr. Speaker, is a direct contravention of Article 118 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the overemphasis of coordination between the two houses, of a consensus and clear guidelines of how we can coordinate, Mr. Speaker, directly interferes with autonomy of each house and the independence of each house, interfering with our representation of different interests and different constituency, whatever we represent, we don't represent the same thing, the same houses, Mr. Speaker. And also that coordination that they have outlined very clearly how the two houses can coordinate will create bureaucracy, Mr. Speaker. Already we have a backlog of laws, so this will further delay the legislative role and the churning out of laws from both houses, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to call upon members of this House to reject this bill in totality and preserve the place of the Senate and devolution in this country, Mr. Speaker. I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Karen. Senator Wambua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank Senator Karen and Senator Faki for yielding their time to enable me make a contribution to this bill. I'll also yield my time to Senator Tobiko to see if she can also make a contribution. Mr. Speaker, from the onset, let it go on record that I stand in complete opposition to the Houses of Parliament, the Bicameral Relations Bill 2023. For the following reasons, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to begin with, this is a bill conceived and drafted in utmost bad faith. In utmost bad faith, Mr. Speaker, because if indeed the drafters of this bill or the promoters of this bill wanted a smooth operation of the both houses of Parliament, then naturally the Senate should have been part and parcel of the thinking around this bill. To the extent that, Mr. Speaker, a bill has landed to us from the National Assembly purporting to smoothen the operations between the two houses of Parliament, that to me speaks to utmost bad faith. Mr. Speaker, in the 13th Parliament, devolution has come under attack so intensely than at any other time in the history of devolved units in this country. I say this, Mr. Speaker, because just the other day, we were here debating the Division of Revenue Bill. And this country was treated to blatant untruths. I don't want to call them lies, untruths, Mr. Speaker, from the National Assembly, that a whole chairman of a committee would want to tell this country, the world, to believe that the revenue allocation, the equitable share to counties in the 2023-2024 financial year was at 374 billion Kenya shillings, where we all know that we passed 385 billion Kenya shillings, making it the baseline for decision on how much to allocate in the 2024-2025 financial year. The Speaker, secondly, this bill is drafted in utmost bad faith because it purports to give a roadmap on how both houses of Parliament should operate. Mr. Speaker, I will take a minute to educate the drafters of this bill, the promoters of the bill, on the provisions of Chapter 8 of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, Chapter 8 of the Constitution on legislature is very clear on the roles, the functions of Parliament. And the Senate is established by the same line, the same article in the Constitution that establishes the National Assembly. So the National Assembly cannot purport to lecture anyone, least of all the Senate, on how to conduct our business, on how both houses should conduct their businesses. Mr. Speaker, it is a matter in the public domain that there is some contestation on the interpretation of Article 110(3) of the Constitution. And I find it extremely pretentious of the National Assembly to purport to resolve that matter through a bill which is very partisan, to interpret then what 110 means for both houses of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I have listened to Senator Gloria Oroba make a presentation. And I want to say two things about the presentation made by Senator Gloria Oroba. One, I agree with Senator Gloria Oroba that perhaps it is time to reflect as a House, because we have endured blow after blow from the National Assembly, an attack every passing day. And the Speaker, every time a bill lands in the office of the Speaker of the Senate of the Republic of Kenya, I don't know whether it is by virtue of us being the true leaders in this country or a demonstration of our efficiency in conducting our business, but we are in so much hurry to process bills from the National Assembly, but for them, bills emanating from the Senate don't make sense. In fact, those bills are always an afterthought. Mr. Speaker, perhaps we should go by the Roman principle of an eye for an eye, so that if they want us to consider any bill, including this bill drafted in utmost bad faith, then they must demonstrate that they are also considering bills emanating from the Senate. In the absence of that, Mr. Speaker, we have members here who have drafted hundreds of bills. Let us deal with our bills. Let's keep piling our bills to them. And we don't consider bills that emanate from the National Assembly unless they consider our bills as well. Mr. Speaker, on the second matter raised by Senator Oroba, and I was just going through this bill, and I was shocked, Mr. Speaker, that Clause 12 of this bill, the National Assembly has already started implementing Clause 12 even before we pass this bill that we are going to reject. How is it that, Mr. Speaker, a senator would think about a legislative idea, nurture that idea, go through the drafting stages, push it, lobby members to support the bill, push it through the stages of process in this House, that bill finds its way in the National Assembly, and just by the opinion of the Speaker or the opinion of a committee of the National Assembly, they decide that this bill is a money bill. And so for that reason, a member of the National Assembly can just adopt, adopt a bill, and now it becomes a bill of the National Assembly. How ridiculous can that be? That the work of senators is to think and to put in so much to develop bills and push them through all the stages, only for somebody in the National Assembly to adopt. Mr. Speaker, that should never be allowed. Because I want to give some time to Senator Tobiko, allow me to say these two last things. One, Mr. Speaker, as a leader in this House, I'll be having a conversation with my side, and I hope the leaders on the other side will also have a conversation with members on their side. On how going forward, we are going to be treating these things called joint sittings of Parliament. In those joint sittings, Mr. Speaker, we are going to insist that the speakers of both houses preside over those joint sittings. We are going to insist that each side of each house of Parliament will have their standing orders applying to their members. You cannot subject senators to the standing orders of the National Assembly in a joint sitting. That, Mr. Speaker, we are going to reject. The Speaker, on the last matter of public participation, we shall carry out public participation on every bill that comes into this House, whether it has originated from the National Assembly or wherever it has originated, Mr. Speaker, because that is the law, that is what is expected of us. The Speaker, I yield the remainder of my time to Senator Tobiko, and with those many remarks, I oppose this bill.
Senator Paris Tobiko.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Senator Wambua, for being very, very gracious. Mr. Speaker, I arise to oppose this bill and to support the position of the Jailer Committee and the position that many, many, many members have already taken, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, initially, I was a bit reluctant to contribute, or to take a position on this bill, simply because I have had a chance of being a member of both houses, and I have a lot of respect for the National Assembly, and I do have attach premium value to the Senate, Mr. Speaker. And so when it comes to, a tug of war between the two houses of Parliament, Mr. Speaker, it puts me in a very awkward position, Mr. Speaker. But this being this said, Mr. Speaker, I would still say that this bill, as has been said, was done in bad faith, Mr. Speaker. And so we should reject in totality, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is sad when both houses are, clamoring for which house is supreme, which house takes precedence, which house will do this, and which house will not, Mr. Speaker, because Kenyans do expect better of us, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Kenyans expect us to, operate with a lot of maturity and decorum. Kenyans expect us to show leadership. Kenyans expect us to obey the rule of law and the Constitution to the letter, Mr. Speaker. And if we were all to go according to the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, then the roles of both houses are well defined, Mr. Speaker, and there will be no squabble, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, we have allowed ourselves as the Senate to be dragged into, these squabbles instead of us taking our prime time, Mr. Speaker, to discuss what matters most to the population of this country. Kenyans want legislators to make a difference, Mr. Speaker, by passing laws that will help them, by passing laws that will ease, their lives, Mr. Speaker. Kenyans are expecting us to be discussing the issues that affect them at the counties, Mr. Speaker. At the moment, Mr. Speaker, you know what the rains, the havoc the rains have done on our roads. Kenyans expect us to be giving a solution to, the infrastructural challenges in this country, the water issues, the health sector, Mr. Speaker, where our doctors have been, demonstrating throughout, Mr. Speaker. And so it is sad, Mr. Speaker, that now we get into a sibling rivalry with the National Assembly instead of us taking time to address what Kenyans really expect of us, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thought the laws should really guide both houses, Mr. Speaker, on what should be done. and what guides joint sittings, Mr. Speaker. And with utmost respect to both houses, Mr. Speaker, this is the route we should not take. Saying, Mr. Speaker, that we get into a situation whereby we say, let us now, an eye for an eye, Mr. Speaker. Let us revenge, Mr. Speaker. I don't think that is the route to go, Mr. Speaker. I believe this House can rise to the occasion to be the bigger brother, and Mr. Speaker, to be a well-endowed House with a lot of experience and brains, Mr. Speaker, for us to give a better direction in this country. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Harris, and all members rise. Honorable Senators, it's now 6:30 p.m., time to adjourn the House. The Senate therefore stands adjourned until tomorrow, Wednesday, 22nd of May, 2024, at 9:30 a.m.